Joy, I think, and from the research that I did, comes from something deeper, usually connected with meaning and purpose, right? So if you're doing something that taps into a way that gives you meaning to your life or meaning to your work, um, suddenly it starts to feel like joy. And if that's what you're doing, activism very naturally sort of plays with joy in that case. It's not to say that you're going to be happy all the time, but certainly as you make progress and start including more meaning and purpose in your life, joy starts to emerge.
Hello, and welcome back to Seek the Joy podcast. Happy Seek the Joy Tuesday. I'm your host, Sydney Weiss, and I am really honored to share with you today's new episode because not only is it so good, but you're just going to love our guest. So I'm joined by Karen Walrond. She's a lawyer, leadership coach, activist, and the author of the Lightmaker's Manifesto, How to Work for Change Without Losing Your Joy. And if you've been listening to Seek the Joy podcast for a while, and I think especially in 2020, you know I talked often, and I do continue to talk often, about this need or this ability that we have as humans to hold joy, celebration, happiness, love in one hand, and then disappointment, anger, frustration, sadness in the other. That these emotions, these experiences are not meant to be mutually exclusive, but that we can really have one at the same time as the other. And it's about learning to hold both at the same time. And so I think it's probably very safe to say that I was so excited to sit down with Karen for today's new episode because we really dive in to her new book, The Lightmaker's Manifesto. And that's really all about how activism and joy are not mutually exclusive. In fact, it is our joy that can be the fuel of our activism. So we talk about this connection between joy and activism. Karen talks to us about why she didn't necessarily see herself as an activist and how she defines activism. We then dive into how we can distinguish joy from happiness, why joy is driven by purpose and meaning, and the connection between activism and spirituality. We talk too about how we can work for change and advocate for the causes that we care about without losing our joy, which is huge because burnout can often be a big part of activism or speaking up or speaking our truth. And so we dive into that as well. And the difference between what sparks our activism and the fuel that keeps us going. I was so curious about how we can sustain our joy and sustain our activism through it. And Karen just has the most beautiful insight. Plus, Karen shares the self-inquiry strategies that will help us dive deeper into this work, how she's making light in the world, her word for 2022, her go-to affirmation, and so much more. One of the reasons why I do this podcast is because I really want you to be able to live a happier, more joyful, and just ease-filled life. And so that's why I'm so happy to share that today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. The last year and a half, there is no doubt it's been difficult. And that's why I think now more than ever, it's important that we have reliable resources that we can turn to. And that's where BetterHelp comes in. So this is how it works. BetterHelp will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist. It's easy and free to change counselors if you don't think the person you're matched with is a good fit. And this service is available for people worldwide too. BetterHelp also offers a broad range of expertise in their counselor network, so you'll get timely and thoughtful responses, and you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions too. So, as a listener of Seek the Joy podcast, you will get 10% off your first month by going to BetterHelp.com/seekthejoy. Join over 1 million people taking charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/seekthejoy. The link will also be included in our show notes. Before we dive in to today's new episode with Karen, I just want to take a second to say that I know activism can be a huge concept or thing or entity to wrap our arms around. And the last 2 years, there's been a gift of greater opportunity for activism and greater opportunity to speak up and speak our truth and be involved, I think, in ways that maybe so many of us didn't anticipate. And Karen shares she started writing this book like right as the pandemic hit, and the timing is just so interesting. But there's something that she says in this episode, remembering that the goal isn't the finish line. It's actually the journey. It's actually this process of tapping into your joy, of tapping into what inspires you, motivates you, keeps you energized. That's then going to be the fuel that keeps you going, that allows you to be a greater participant in this level of activism. So Karen, thank you for such a wonderful conversation. As always, I can't wait to hear what you think about this one. So make sure to join the conversation on our social media channels, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We are at Seek the Joy Podcast everywhere. Send me an email, send me a DM, rate and review the podcast, follow us wherever it is that you're tuning in right now. And without further ado, here's my conversation with Karen Walrond. Yeah, so first of all, thank you for coming on Seek the Joy. You are going to be, I think, like one of the first episodes that I air in 2022.
Oh,
so,
I'm thrilled. That's
I know,
exciting.
It's really, really exciting. So to start this off, usually I love to dive into like who you are and your work, but have you started thinking at all about 2022 or an intention or a word maybe that comes to mind? I've been thinking, for context, we're talking the day before Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking a lot about this. So curious for you if an intention or a word maybe that will sum up this new year, if any of that has come to mind yet for you.
Yeah, it's so funny that you bring that up because I think I came up with my word yesterday. I've been doing this for like, maybe a decade. I've been coming up with a word or words. And actually, part of the reason that I wrote my book that we're going to be talking about had to do a lot with the word. So I think expansiveness is kind of a word that keeps coming up. So I think expansive or expansiveness, something like that, but I'm not sure. What about you?
I keep coming back to either courage or just forward. The word forward keeps coming to mind because I think, and this kind of goes hand in hand with expansiveness. The last 2 years almost, we've been in this space of navigating how to just maintain ourselves. And if we can do anything above and beyond, that's felt like a huge victory. So just the ability to continue to move forward and expand and have courage within that, I think, how beautiful.
That's awesome. Yeah,
we need more of it. We
Absolutely.
need more of it. We need more of it.
Here's to 2022, man.
I know. I'm here for it. I'm ready. I don't know about you. Just give me a brand new year. Give me a brand new year. So you brought up your new book. And I would love to dive into it. It's called the Lightmaker's Manifesto, How to Work for Change Without Losing Your Joy.
Amen.
This is, when I got an email like talking about you and your new book, I was like, oh my God, because this has been a huge thing for me. How can we continue to make change, to speak up for the things that we feel passionate about, that are either bothering us in the world, or we want to make change, or we want to do something on behalf of somebody else. But then how do we do it without losing our joy? Because it can feel super heavy, for lack of a better word.
No, that's a great
draining,
word. Yeah.
Exhausting. Yes. So
discouraging, depleting, like
all of the things. Exactly. Yeah. And then the process of filling your tank back up is a whole other thing. So before we even get to that though, I'm curious, before you started writing this book, did you even see yourself as an activist?
No. Did I answer that fast enough?
Yes, you did. It was like a hell no, I did not.
No, I did not. And it's so funny because since writing the book, I've had a lot of people who've read the book email me or call me and say, you know what, I think I'm an activist. I absolutely did not think of it that way. So the way the book came, I actually wasn't, it wasn't my idea, right? Like I would love to say that I had this muse in me that was crying to get out, but it wasn't my idea. My publisher, who I had never worked with before, emailed me and had signed up for my newsletter on my website and had read some of that. And also that I had contributed to a couple of other books. And she said, I would like you to write a book. We were looking for a book on the intersection of joy and activism. And I think you could write it. And because I choose a word of the year, I actually had 2 words. This was January 2nd, by the way, 2020, when I got this email.
Oh my God. So
January
pre-pandemic.
Pre-pandemic,
wow.
Pre-George Floyd,
everything.
pre-Breonna Taylor, pre-Ahmed, pre-everything, right?
Everything.
And I got this email, and my words for 2020 were bold and experiment. I had chosen two
Oh,
words. And
wow.
so this email came in and I was like, normally I would have ignored it. Normally I'd have
Mhm.
been like, I don't know who this person is. But bold and experiment, right? So I took a call with her and she said, I think you can do this. And I said, yes, I can, at bold and experiment, baby. And then hung up the phone or hung up the Zoom and went, I am totally not qualified to do this. Like I am
Mm.
not, I've written a lot about joy and I do think a lot about joy and gratitude but I'm not an activist. I've done activisty things, I suppose. Like I've marched in a pride parade. I've done a
Yeah.
woman's march.
Yeah.
I've traveled to places as a photographer and did work with organizations and NGOs, but that's not an activist. An activist is somebody who like gets tear gassed or
Mm.
arrested, right? That's those are activists. But I had already committed that I was going to do it, and so, or at least pitch it, right? Like put together a book proposal for
Yeah.
her. And so I thought, well, I love interviewing people, so let me think about who I can think of that I really love that I think are activists. And Brene Brown is a dear friend of mine, and I think of her very much as an anti-discrimination activist. And
Mhm.
Tarana Burke is a friend of mine, and she's, with her Me Too movement, I think of her as an activist for people who suffered sexual assault. And so I made this list and I suddenly realized that all the people that I put on my list were not people that I necessarily associated with getting arrested or getting tear gassed.
Oh, wow.
And so
Yeah.
I thought, well, why am I okay with calling them activists, but I'm not okay with calling myself one? And
Mhm.
that exploration is really what the book is about. Like that's really what ended up becoming the Lightmaker's Manifesto.
I love what you shared that you didn't see yourself as an activist, but you were surrounded by all these incredible people in
Mm,
your life who you saw as an activist, but maybe didn't fit that direct mold. I
yeah,
think we're all activists in
we
our own
can be
way,
for sure. Yeah.
and it doesn't have to fit maybe that model or view or what we typically think an activist is. I'm curious today, like, do you have a new definition for activist or activism since writing the book?
Well, I do, right? So I feel like
Don't
the
blow
word
my cover here, Karen.
so I feel like activist is anybody who's led by their values
Mhm.
to purposeful action in the hope of making the world brighter for others, right?
So good.
So yeah, I mean, we all can be activists. I don't know that we all are activists, but I think if you are moved to purposeful action because something in your values tell you have to do something, and you do it for the benefit of, it might benefit you, but you're doing it for the benefit of a community of other people, you get to call yourself an activist, whether or not you are marching in the streets and getting tear gassed, or you're letter writing, or you're calling representatives, or you're starting a foundation, or whatever, or you're making something, the proceeds of which will help support whatever it is. You can
Mhm.
definitely become a politician, whatever it is. Absolutely.
I love what you said. When you are led by your values
Mm,
to do something much larger than yourself,
yeah,
to help others, by extension, it does help you, but it's really about helping others. And activism, when I think about the word activism, the word act is in there. Like you're
absolutely.
literally doing something for the benefit, I think, of the greater whole. But I think a lot of us are, I mean, at least sometimes I can be intimidated by the word activism. Like it feels
Yeah,
really big.
yeah.
And when we are led to activism, when we are led to act, it's not really coming out of great things most of the time, like
No,
happy, joyful moments in our lives or in society. And I know the book really explores how joy and activism are not mutually exclusive, right? Like
right.
they can really go hand in hand. So I'm curious about this because activism doesn't necessarily come from joy. At least it hasn't in my experience for the most part.
Yes, I think you're right that we don't get into activism because things are great, right? Like
Yes,
we
exactly.
usually
Yeah.
get into activism because something has really, like made us angry or
Hmm.
broken our hearts um but I think also we have to just as we talk about what does activism look like, I think we also have to talk about what does joy look like. And
Yes.
I distinguish joy from happiness. Like I think happiness is something that's really fleeting, that's sort of, you know, an external circumstance that makes you happy, like, people wish you happy birthday on your birthday, or
Hmm.
your barista makes your latte exactly like you like it, or what, right? Like, or you get a
Yeah.
bonus check, like that's happy. But joy, I think, And from the research that I did, comes from something deeper, usually connected with meaning and purpose, right? So if
Mm,
you're doing something that taps into a way that gives you meaning to your life or meaning to your work, um, suddenly it starts to feel like joy.
mm-hmm.
And if that's what you're doing, activism very naturally sort of plays with joy in that case. It's not to say that you're going to be happy all the time, but certainly as you make progress and start including more meaning and purpose in your life, joy starts to emerge.
Mm-hmm. Purpose and meaning, joy and its connection to purpose and meaning. And the more I
Yeah.
think about what you're sharing, I mean, it speaks so much to me and what we've been talking on this podcast about for the last 4 years is
Mm.
when you step into what makes you feel good, what makes you
Mhm.
feel the most alive, whether other people understand it or not, but if it just makes you feel good, you're tapping into this inherent purpose you have within you, which is just to be the fullest, in my opinion, to be the fullest expression of who you are. So
Yeah.
when you start to explore that for yourself and find meaning from what you're doing, joy comes from it. So to me it makes sense if
Yeah.
part of that for you is activism and speaking up or speaking out or supporting causes or people or things, moments that resonate and are important to you that coincide with your values, then hell yeah, joy comes from that.
Absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think and part of what the book talks about is, especially if you're doing something that generally lights you up
Mm-hmm.
in service for others, right? So if you're doing something, if like, I don't know, if letter writing is not your thing, but you're like, okay, the only way to be an activist is letter write, well, you're going to end up burning out. You're going to end up getting tired or just, but if singing is your thing and you figure out a way to use your voice in singing to help support a community, well, now you're doing something you love and you're doing it in a meaningful way. It starts to really feel easy to access that joy.
Yeah, I think so too. It's so interesting what you were just sharing about when you're doing something that resonates for you, you won't feel depleted. You
Right.
won't feel burned out. And this brings me something to that I really wanted to ask you about is, how can we really go about working for these causes or these things that we care about without losing our joy? And a lot of it sounds like it's about finding what resonates, but I'm curious if there's more to that. Like, how can we really dive in without experiencing burnout? Are there things that we can do that are sort of self-preservation? I don't know if that's the right word, but
Mhm.
hopefully you know what I mean, where we
Yeah.
can really maintain ourselves and have sustainability, maybe
Sure.
through it.
Sure. So again, that was part of the whole journey of writing this book, was really interviewing people who I thought mastered this, right? Like figured
Mm-hmm.
out how to do this in a way that they seemed like happy, joyful people, even as they worked in situations that are very difficult and
Yeah.
tough. And one of the best wisdom, I think, one of them that I got was from Sikh, Sikh, Sikh American activist Valerie Kaur. And Valerie she does a lot of work on in discrimination, particularly against, you know, like anti-Muslim discrimination,
Mm-hmm.
anti-immigrant discrimination. She's a lawyer. She's a filmmaker. She's an author of a great book called See No Stranger. And she's also a faith leader. And
Mm.
one of the things that the reason that I actually found her was that she had done this amazing, amazing talk. Uh, it was the 2016, I think, in 2016. And it was this talk that she did. You can Google it. And it was at a faith community. And it was called a sick prayer for America
Mm.
was the name of it if you Google it. And she uses the imagery or the metaphor of the midwife. And when somebody gives birth, the midwife tells you to breathe first and then push, breathe and then push. And so she talks about activism, that we can take that wisdom into activism and that rhythm of breathing and pushing, right? And so what you do is that you stop and you breathe. And it's not just self care, although that's certainly a component of it, but it's also gathering the energy,
Mm.
right? Gathering yourself in order to push forward in the march for justice. And so for her, activism is about the rhythm, right? And I think that's a really, really important aspect that we don't talk about a lot, is that it should be rhythmic, and the way that you do like create longevity in the work and sustainability in the work is really sort of tapping into the rhythm of being able to know, okay, I've pushed as long as I can now I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
stop and I'm going to breathe, I'm going to gather myself. That could be self-care, it could be a media break, it could be whatever, but you grab, you gather that energy and then you push forward again.
Hmm.
So that was one thing that was really helpful for me. The other is also sort of remembering that the goal isn't the finish line,
Mm-hmm.
the goal is progress. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of a when you realize that you may not make it to the finish line, um it sounds a little depressing, but it actually is quite freeing, because now it's just about really sort of being able to breathe and push and tap into that rhythm so that you can pass the baton on to people who come after you, who can
Mm-hmm.
continue that march.
Honoring and tapping into the rhythms of
Yeah,
any cycle, any movement, your own physicality, your own physiology,
sure.
huge. Because
Yeah,
we often feel, at least when we're excited, we're motivated, we're passionate, we want to put that foot on the accelerator
sure.
and keep it there, like put a brick on top and be like, all right, I'm off to the races. But that's really where a lot of the burnout comes in, because you're not honoring or tapping into those rhythms. I love what you said too. The goal is progress. The goal is
Yeah,
the journey. We're not gonna, I don't know about you, but I don't think we're gonna see the finish line in our
no,
lifetime when it comes to uh, anti-racism, when it comes to um, eradicating white supremacy, the financial wage gap. I mean, I could go on, women's rights. I think it's depressing, but I don't think we're going to see the finish line in our lifetime. But I love what you said, that it kind of, for lack of a better expression, it takes the stakes out. It takes the pressure off, knowing that you're moving towards progress and you're laying a good, solid foundation through your own advocacy, through your own joy that can inspire
absolutely.
somebody else, who then will take that baton and do the work themselves, and then take that baton and pass it on too. How beautiful and how freeing, because we often feel like, oh my God, we've got to do it right now. And yeah,
Yeah,
we do. We got to do the important work. We have to have the necessary conversations, policy changes, everything. But we cannot do it all by ourselves and all in this lifetime. There's no way.
absolutely.
There's no way. So
Absolutely.
I love what you said, honoring the rhythms and recognizing that the goal is progress.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just, day by day, you do what you can.
Mm-hmm.
That's all we can do, right? And
Mm-hmm.
we do it in community, and we do it and we celebrate the wins, and there's all these different ways that we can make sure that we don't burn out, right? Like that
Yeah.
we enjoy the ride. We enjoy the
Mm-hmm.
rhythm.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious too, that something that came to mind as you were speaking when talking about these rhythms. I'm
Mm.
curious if what fuels you makes a difference. So if it's anger, if it's sadness, if it's joy, does that make a difference when it comes to sustainability and activism? I don't know if that question even makes sense, but if you're fueled by rage, I guess, does that fuel you more so than joy? Does joy fuel you more than anger and rage? I go back and forth because I think, well, I don't want to answer my own question. I want to curious what you think.
Well, one of the things that I always think about, because I do hear people say that, fueled by rage or fueled by anger or fueled by heartbreak, I
Mm-hmm.
like to think of those emotions actually as not the fuel, but the spark. Like those
Mm,
are the things that actually spark you into movement. And so one of the things that I want to be very clear about with this book is this is not some sort of woo woo happy think happy and it will be happy. Like, of course you're going to feel
yeah,
heartbreak and fury and all of those emotions that are very challenging and difficult. But they are that spark. They are the thing that makes that that maybe does that initial
mm-hmm.
propulsion. But what fuels you and what continues that is the doing it in community, celebrating the wins, taking self-care, making sure that you take some time off before you
Mm-hmm.
push again, getting creative. All of those things, that's the fuel for
Yeah,
me. That's what I think of as the fuel.
yeah,
So yeah, so I would just offer maybe another way to think about
I love it.
what that is. Yeah,
Yeah, spark versus fuel. What
yeah,
ignites you is not going to be what sustains you necessarily. It can
absolutely.
be, but it may not necessarily be. I'm curious because something we had talked about a little bit ago was joy and its connection to purpose and meaning.
Yeah.
When I also think about purpose and meaning, I think a lot about spirituality.
Hmm.
I think about something greater than who we are or what we are. And so I'm curious, through the book or through your research or putting all of this together, exploring this for yourself, have you found a greater connection between activism, joy, and spirituality?
Yeah. So this was one of the first things that I actually tackled in the book was the
Mm,
question of spirituality, because I wondered if like a belief in God or a belief in higher power was really sort of necessary
mhm,
um, in order to do this. And so the people that I interviewed are from all sorts of faith or not faith backgrounds, right? Some of them are, some of them are Christian, some of them are Jewish, some of them are atheists, right? Some of them used to be Christian and are no longer Christian, like it
yeah,
was there. I just mentioned Valerie, who's sick. Um so I really wanted to get into this sort of idea of how much faith and or spirituality was important in activism. And one of the first people I interviewed was a friend of mine who he's the director of the Jung Center here in Houston. He's the executive director. He's a PhD psychologist, but he also has a master's, I think, in religious studies. And if you ask him what his faith is, he would say sort of it's complicated, right? Sort of thing. So, and he described spirituality to me as something that I thought was really interesting. He said spirituality is about experiences of meaning. Experiences of meaning, which is such a
mm,
great definition. And so, by that definition, activism can feel very spiritual, right? Because
mhm,
it can feel very transcendent. It's about sort of believing in something bigger than us. And it's not, and that believing that something may be God, it may be humanity, it may be love, can be anything, whatever it is that we believe in. And I don't think we activists I think if we didn't believe in something bigger than us, whatever that is,
mhm,
interconnectedness, love, whatever you want to call it, if we did believe in that, I don't think we'd be activists. I mean,
mhm,
the whole point is really sort of making the world better, making it better for people. Um, and so I feel like there is something there about spirituality, but maybe not in sort of the superficial definition of spirituality. That it's something deeper.
mhm. So that it doesn't necessarily require us to have a spiritual practice to
Correct.
participate in activism or to have our joy fuel our activism, but more so that activism really creates, I love this, these experiences of meaning.
Yeah.
And it's really, I have found for me, I'm curious for you too, when you have those experiences that are meaningful for you, that ignite you, that propel you, that's really where a lot of that sustainability comes from, this ability
Absolutely.
to continue to work towards, move towards, advocate for and towards the things that are important to you, because you keep coming back to almost this spark, this moment of connection, of meaning, this experience that has connected you in a way that wouldn't otherwise. Oh,
That's
it's so
absolutely
beautiful. I
that's
really
absolutely
love
it.
that. It's about
Yeah.
experiences of meaning.
Yeah, it was such it literally sort of kind of exploded everything for me. He was Sean Fitzpatrick, who's the director of the Young
Hmm.
Center. He was actually the second person I interviewed. The first person was actually a faith leader. He was a minister at the in the United Church of Canada. And
Mm,
he said, yeah, activism can be very spiritual, but I thought, you know what? I don't know if I trust your answer because your job is sort of,
hmm,
as a faith leader.
hmm,
Um, so it was really interesting to hear from somebody else and that was secular that was like, oh, this is what this is about. And so, yeah, I mean, do you need a spiritual practice? I mean, I don't know if you think of that rhythm that we talked about that self. I mean, that could be a spiritual practice, but you
totally.
don't need a faith home, right? I
Yeah.
think is probably that for sure you don't need one.
I love that. You don't need a faith home. You don't need to be connected to a certain faith
Yeah.
to participate. And, it's interesting because the more I've dived into this work of joy, because for me, this
Mm,
has been a journey of joy the last 4 years, and tapping into my own mindfulness practice. And really, it's become a practice of self exploration, to be honest. And so, when we were talking about those rhythms and honoring those rhythms, that's what that is. It is a
mm,
practice of mindfulness,
yeah.
it is a practice of honoring yourself and taking a moment, I think, to evaluate, where am I? How do
Yeah.
I feel? And it's so interesting, this connection between joy, mindfulness, and activism, which ties in inherently spirituality, which ties in inherently, I think, um, connection with others. It ties in this ability to see beyond yourself, which
Mhm.
sometimes I think we really need. We can get really wrapped up in our own stuff. How beautifully connected this whole theme, this whole experience is. I'm sure throughout the book, researching and writing the book, you had to have had these like incredible light bulb moments along the way where you're like, oh, I didn't think about it that way, but I
Yeah.
get it now.
Yeah, for
Totally.
sure. I mean, every single person I interviewed, and I interviewed about a dozen people, said something that I was like, oh my God, I'd never
Hmm.
considered it that way. And so what's funny, not funny, haha, but unusual is
Yeah.
so I signed the deal to write this book probably in March of 2020.
Hmm.
Um, and then basically,
Pandemic.
literally the pandemic happened. George Floyd was killed. Breonna Taylor was killed. And I remember my publisher, the one who had emailed me that day, she called me one day and she's like, I feel like I should apologize to you for making you write a book about joy and activism when the world
Oh,
is on
wow.
fire, right? Like,
Yeah.
like, and I said, actually, it's been such a gift because
Mhm.
as everything is just falling apart around us, I'm speaking with people who have made it their life's work to make sure that we're all taken care of. And there's
Mm.
something really healing about connecting with people who are focused on making the world brighter
Mhm.
during times that are so dark, right? Like,
Mhm.
I don't know that they would have shone as brightly as they did, um,
Yeah.
but for the fact that we were in a really, really tough year, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's interesting, I'm thinking about the people that you did interview in the book, and I'm curious how you even chose those people. But before I ask you that question, it's interesting because these are all people who have made this their life's work, but they do so without denying the reality of what's happening around them,
Absolutely.
right? With a full acknowledgement of the pain, of the hurt, of the brutality, of the anger, the rage, everything. And I think sometimes we as humans can try and ignore all that stuff and just focus on the good or the positive or the joy. But we've got to do both at
Yeah.
the same time. And every single person you interview for this book has this amazing ability to do both
Yeah.
and to reflect on both and find that joy and that spark and that light while still acknowledging the reality of what's happening around us. And so I want to
Yeah.
know, like, how did you pick these 12 people? Or I think it's a little bit more, but how did you pick all these people for the book?
Well, some of them for sure, like Brene and Tarana, were friends, right? And
Mhm.
so that was sort of an easy they
An easy
Valerie,
phone call, like,
yeah,
come on
like I
board.
was like, can you help me with this? Right. And Valerie Core was another one who so it was really fun. So some of them were good friends.
Yeah.
Jess Weiner is also a very good friend of mine. She does a lot of stuff for helping empower women and girls, right?
Mhm.
Particularly girls. Um and then Jess introduced me. She was like, as long as you're doing this, you should meet this friend of mine, Zuri Adele, who's an actor.
Mm.
And so people became friends as part of the process as well. So some of them were friends of friends. One person, Jordan Seabury, who is an absolute just he's an angel on the planet as far as I'm concerned.
Mm.
Was I found because a friend of mine, he's an artist, and a friend of mine had shared his art on her Instagram feed. And so I went
Wow.
and clicked on him, and his bio said, um, public policy director by day, artist by night. And I was like,
Mm. I
I'm
love
intrigued.
this.
And so I just sent him, I just cold called him and said, would you be interested in being interviewed for this book? So some of it was just serendipitous. Some people were, I happened to meet Sean, the head of the Young Center. He and I are both members of an organization, Houston Coalition Against Hate.
Mhm.
And I didn't know him. I'd gone to the meeting, but he did a presentation and I approached him afterwards and said, I think you can help me with this. And so
Mhm.
some of it was serendipity. Some of it were long, friends I've known for years. Some of them
Yeah.
became friends as part of the process.
Hmm. I'm curious. I've been thinking a lot about what we were saying at the beginning of this conversation. You just didn't think you were an activist,
Yeah.
but this book, obviously, and the research and all these incredible interviews have changed your perspective.
Mm.
But I'm curious about how your own experiences have impacted or influenced your perspective, maybe around activism and joy. Because we all have our own maybe experiences or moments, I think, that that shape maybe how we think about things. I'm curious if there are moments in your life that also impacted the way you think about this, in addition to the conversations and the interviews and the research and everything that went into the book.
I mean, so the first thing that I think, the first sort of aha that happened for me was I had done a lot of work with the One Campaign, which is an
Hmm.
organization that's an advocacy organization that helps fight extreme poverty and preventable disease. And when I first started writing the book, my thought was, I traveled to Africa, several times with this organization, different parts of Africa, different countries. And that was fun for me. I was
Hmm.
going as a photographer. I love photography. Um, and so I thought, well, I'll open the book with, something that I did that I thought was fun. Um, and then in the writing of that, I realized that the lesson wasn't the fact that it was fun for me. The lesson was in the fact that the people that I was working with, um, who were, they were home healthcare workers, and they were traveling from home to home,
Hmm.
testing families for HIV. And of course, sometimes people tested positive. And so they're dealing with, sometimes children tested positive. Um, and yet they were very joyful. And so I sort
Hmm.
of realized that literally in the writing of the book, like, first of all, it wasn't about me, it was about witnessing this.
Yeah.
And then and that was sort of the thing that made me realize it difficult situations can still result in joy, and that's what
Hmm.
happened here. um and I also, I mean, one of the things I think that I learned about myself was that I need to give myself some grace, right? Because I had this idea that activism had to be painful and difficult, and that I was not worthy of the title, I guess, of activism.
Yeah.
And I realized that that's just not true. That as activists, of course, we deal with difficult stuff, but we don't have to suffer, right? Like we don't have to suffer as activists.
Hmm.
Our job is to help prevent the suffering. And
Hmm.
so, and if we do suffer, that there's a way to get into that rhythm to sort of take care of ourselves. And so, I guess really sort of the reflection, just like the people who email me and say, oh, I think I might be an activist. I mean, for sure that happened for me as part of this, like, oh
Totally.
yeah,
Yeah.
that is something that I do. And also the idea that activism, for some of these people, activism is their full-time job, but
Hmm.
for a lot of them it's not. For a lot of them it's something that they do, or something that they bring into their job.
Hmm.
Like, I think of Brene as somebody who, her work is not about activism, right? It's about courage and empathy. And
Hmm.
but she, as part of what she does sort of try to make sure that she's showing up as an ally and as an activist. And I
Yeah,
think that there's
absolutely.
ways that we can do that, even
Hmm.
if our full-time jobs has nothing to do with
Yeah.
specifically activism.
Yeah. The book is filled with these moments and
Mm,
opportunities for self inquiry
mm,
and to really dive in and I think explore exactly what you're talking about is that even if activism is not part of my full time job, how can it be an aspect of what I do? How can I pull it in to
mhm.
my work? How can I make it part of me? I think in a lot of ways. Can we give people maybe a little bit of a preview of what maybe some of those opportunities for self inquiry are in the book? I know a lot of your work. You're a photographer. You've got this incredible blog. You're a former lawyer, and as a current lawyer, I have so much respect for the former lawyer
I
in
didn't know you
you.
were a lawyer as
I'm
well.
a
That's
lawyer,
awesome.
yeah. So I'm curious if we can give people maybe a little preview or an idea of what is kind of woven through the book as these moments of maybe self reflection or self inquiry.
Yeah. So I'm a really big fan of journalings. I
Hmm.
journal a lot. Um and I journal in a way that I think maybe most people would not um expect. I think people who don't journal think it's sort of a dear diary kind of thing, and that's not what I do. I literally spill my journal. I scratch, I throw scratch paper in it. I just throw stuff in it.
Yeah.
And so the book itself actually has what I call a Lightmaker's manual in the back of the book, that actually has a bunch of journaling prompts and a bunch of questions that you can ask yourself as you try to figure out how you would like to serve, right, as an
Hmm.
activist. But and it's not an exercise that I can't claim it as my own original exercise, but one way that I often share with people just to get started a sort of a practice of asking yourself 3 questions every morning. And the 3 questions are: how can I feel connected today? How can I feel healthy today? And how can I feel purposeful today? And they're very simple questions. And usually the answers to those, you put them on your to-do list for the day. So connected could be, I'm just going to send an email to my mom. I haven't talked to her in a while. I just want to say hi. Connected could be, I'm actually going to reach out to a friend and have a meal or whatever. Healthy can be, I'm going to hit it hard at the gym, but healthy can also mean I'm going to take a disco nap for 20 minutes today or what,
Mhm.
or healthy can mean I'm going to go on a media diet today or whatever. And then purposeful is, what can I do to feel like I've been of service today? And it could be, I'm going to donate money. It could be, I'm going to start a foundation. It can be
Mhm.
anything, right? And what
Mhm.
I think happens is, if you have that habit of asking those 3 questions, like even just say 21 days, what may happen is the answers will start to give you some insight into what that thing is that you're like, I should work toward this, or I have this gift that I really love to do. And maybe there's a way to use it of service, but it starts to give you a glimpse into that. So
Mm.
that's always like my first step, is like 21 days, those 3 questions can be really, really helpful.
I love this because it comes back to, I think, the entire, I don't want to say theme, but something that keeps coming up through this conversation is being led by your values, how
Mhm.
these experiences can bring about meaning and purpose and connect you to your joy, and having this moment to think about what is going to make me feel connected today, have healthy today. I mean, huge. Just
Yeah.
talk about starting off on a, I don't want to say the right foot, but I want to say in a way that makes you feel grounded
Yeah.
in
And a
the
mindful
moment.
foot. Yeah.
Yep, the mindful foot. I love this.
Yeah.
Okay, so this has been a wonderful conversation. I have just loved connecting with you, Karen, and I have two questions for you
Okay.
as we close this up. Um, the book is called The Lightmaker's Manifesto,
Mhm.
and behind you it says "Making Light," and so
Yeah.
I
Keep
have to
making light.
keep making light. So I've got to ask, how do you see yourself continuing to make light in this world, either
uh,
through this book, or what is, like, what comes to mind? Because I think we create things, we put beautiful things out there, but there's always a bigger plan, I think. So curious
yeah.
what your thoughts are.
Well, one of the things that I talk about is in the book is about writing a spark statement. So writing
Hmm.
about what is it that you want to stand for? What is the sort of legacy that you want to leave? And for me, like my passion and the thing, the cause that I'm always very moved by is sort of uh, anti-bigotry, anti-discrimination of all kinds.
Hmm.
And I feel like my work is to kind of show how beautiful the world is through my images or through my words, or to amplify the work of people who are doing really, really amazing things. That for me is sort of my activism and advocacy. And I don't know necessarily what that means in the next few years. I'm playing with some ideas right now,
Hmm.
but I know that whatever it is, it's going to be rooted in doing that.
Hmm. Is there a quote or a mantra or an affirmation, something that you either turn to or that has helped guide you, I think, on this path, on this journey of creating and sharing and amplifying this work?
I guess keep making light would
Keep
be the
making light.
one for sure. Yeah,
I
just
think
keep
that's a
making
beautiful
light.
one. My final question for you is this: as you reflect on this book, and now that it's out in the world and people are reading it and diving in, what do you think you learned the most about yourself along the way? Is there anything that comes to mind, either a big light bulb or aha moment, or just a lesson that's kind of been wrapped into this journey for you?
So, one of the biggest surprises and ahas for me actually came as part of the result of researching the book. And it was from a very dear friend of mine, Asha Dornfest, who is a political activist. And she's one of the kindest people I know. And I asked her in the book, I'm like, how can you stay kind in a world
Mm,
that is increasingly divisive? Like, how do you do that? Expecting her honestly to say, well, my mom just raised me that way. And I'm just,
mhm,
and what she said instead was, my kindness is intentional and it's an active resistance. She says, what they want, air quotes, right? What they want is, they want us fighting and they want us
mm,
angry. And my being kind is me saying, I'm not buying that. I'm not going to buy into this binary of I'm good, you're bad, right? I won't do it. She says, I'm not a pushover. And if somebody is abusive to me, I'll step away and, end the conversation. But
yeah.
I am never going to contribute to that acrimony. Kindness is resistance. And I think that has been something that was really eye-opening for me, because I always thought of kindness was about me being better than the other person, right? Like it's sort of like when they go low, I go high because I'm awesomer and I'm better. I never thought of it as no, I'm doing this because I'm not going to fall into that trap. And I really, really loved that. And so that's been something that that I've really kept close since doing the book.
It's this ability to stay true to yourself and stay true to your values. And even when something is hurtful, even when something is unfair, unjust, staying true to who you are in those moments, you'll never regret it.
Yeah,
you'll never regret
absolutely
it.
right.
And if that means leading with your kindness, I'm here for it. All
yeah,
for it.
Amen.
Karen, this has been so wonderful. I would love to share where everyone can connect with you, find your book, your photography. I know you have a podcast. Where can everybody find you and connect and learn more?
So the easiest way is KarenWalrond.com, KarenWalrond. My website is trickalunks.com, but that's a hard word. So just go with KarenWalrond.com, and that will get you everywhere, to the Instagram, to the Twitter, to the Facebook, to everything else. So that's the best place to find me.
Perfect. Everything is going to go in the show notes. So everyone that's listening, head on over seekthejoypodcast.com/show notes to check out Karen and find the link to her website and all the beautiful things. And Karen, this has been wonderful, because this connection between activism and joy is so present. And the more I think that we can step into our joy and allow it to be the fuel that allows us to continue to move forward, everything else might be a spark, but if that can be the fuel, how beautiful. So absolutely. Karen, thank you. This has been wonderful.
Oh, it's been an honor to be a part of this. Thank you so much for having me.
Seek the Joy podcast is a production of Seek the Joy Media and created, produced, and hosted by me, Sydney Weiss. You can tune into all of our episodes on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're enjoying the show, hit follow and leave us a 5-star rating and review. Make sure to join the community, join the conversation on our social media channels, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We are at Seek the Joy Podcast everywhere. And don't forget, you can actually watch today's new episode and all of our episodes on our brand new YouTube channel. Click that link in the show notes to subscribe and tune in. As always, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And I'll see you right back here next week for another Seek the Joy Tuesday.